docuseries on money could be complete unless we really investigated what it means to invest in real estate. And that's exactly what we did with David Shamy. And not only does David Shamy have decades of experience in investing in real estate and teaching how to invest in real estate, but he's also a great entrepreneur. If you could imagine, he's created a brand based on butter that has grown into a multi-million-dollar business also. This is a charismatic guy with great insight, very matter of fact. What you see is what you get. Enjoy this interview and learn about real estate investment. David, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
That's my pleasure.
Tell me about your background.
Well, I've spent my first 35-year career doing seminars, financial literacy, real estate investing, some stock investing seminars, some on taxation and some on motivation. Traveled over 600 cities and 10 countries.
Wow. When you say financial literacy, what does that mean to you?
Financial literacy is knowing what money's for, knowing how to handle it, how to use it, how to budget, how to know what you can afford, what you can't afford, and a specific discipline to use money for what it was intended and not get distracted, which is very easy in this media-driven society we live in, have so many messages being thrown at us. Financial literacy means hanging on to your money and avoiding that Amazon purchase that just looks like something you have to have. I've always been amazed at how much people would rather have stuff than their money.
So, well, that's an interesting way to look at it. So it sounds like basically a philosophy of money.
It is. And I have some very dramatic opinions about money, too. You're going to find me very opinionated.
Well, that's why you're here. So let's dig into some of these opinions. One of the things that stuck out with what you just said was what money was intended to be used for. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, we need money. We have to prioritize what we use it for. And we have to base that on what our specific needs are and what our resources are. And people don't know how to do that. We need to take care of the little money first, and then we can seek the big money later on.
So give me an example of what you mean by that.
Okay, little money.
Okay.
How many times have you been to an ATM and paid a fee for that during your lifetime?
Several.
Yeah, several. And most people, it's hundreds or thousands. I have never paid an ATM fee because that's a discipline that I have, that if I need cash, I am planning out far enough ahead that I can keep that $1.25 or $3 or $5 or even more if you're at a foreign bank. That stays in my pocket. Bouncing a check, great example. That's little money. And people don't realize it until they add up what they've spent in bank fees. I'm a real fanatic when it comes to bank fees. When I first married, my wife bounced 3 checks in 1 month, and I opened up that statement, and there's $60 in fines. Nobody should ever bounce a check. Why would anybody who's planning their life bounce a check or incur a fee like that? You're handing your hard-earned resources to a bank.
And I think that's really kind of the feeling, because it feels differently when you think about the fact that it's like throwing it away.
Yes,
as compared to it's not really a cost of doing business.
No.
It's not a necessary.
It's an unnecessary cost for being lazy, basically.
So what other things would you teach in your seminars when it came to the proper use of money or taking care of the small money first?
Well, first of all, people need to understand what they can afford. Banks have formulas, landlords have formulas. You need to have X times the rent or X times the mortgage in available cash to be able to afford to live there. And the renters don't know that. They don't know what the formula is, so they don't shop with their pocketbook when they're shopping for a rental, or they're shopping for a mortgage, or they're shopping for a car. These are the big things that we buy. They shop with their eyes. I love that. I want it.
Right.
And so we have rampant foreclosure and defaults on car loans and other kinds of purchases. So we need to enter life with a clear-cut vision of what we want for our life. And I think for most people, it's a sense of security. So financial literacy is about having some security along the way, having some fun along the way, but not at the expense of security. So when I teach people, especially on a one-on-one setting, we set down a budget and we say, how much do you have? And what do you have to pay? What are your debts? What are your living expenses? What are you paying yourself? Because a lot of people never pay themselves. They buy stuff, they pay the bank, they pay the electric company, but never pay themselves. So we need a plan for paying ourselves, and then we need a plan for setting some aside. So we're accumulating along the way. Until we have a plan that takes care of basic monthly budgeting, people shouldn't be out buying real estate as an investment. Because this is a big commitment when you're getting into real estate. I used to open my real estate seminars with this question: how would you like to know the secret to getting rich? And my answer is, go into debt as far as you possibly can. Okay. And then I would let there be silence in the room while people kind of digested that. But then I qualified that by letting them know this is managed debt. This is debt that somebody else is paying back for you. A mortgage on a rental property is debt. But if I've got a guy living there who gets up 6 a.m. every morning, 5 days a week, and goes off to work to help pay that mortgage off, I now have an employee, so to speak. And if I have 10 houses, I got 10 people who get up every morning, 5 days a week, and they go to work for me.
Wow, well, and I want to have a more in-depth conversation about your approach towards real estate, and because that sort of changes the lens you look through when you start to think about things in the way you just described it. Do you feel like there's not enough education just in the culture, the modern world toward money? What's the root of the problem?
I think that's an understatement. Yeah. We really have zero education. Some of the high schools will offer a financial literacy class, and it's always very basic, and there's no follow-up. Right. It's like one elective, and that's all there is. And these kids sit there and bide their time and get their grade and move on, right. But never really understanding what it all means. Occasionally, you'll come across a teacher who takes this seriously, and I've gone in and taught some of these classes at a high school level, both on an investing level and just basic financial literacy, to try to teach these kids about money. Same is going to be true with somebody who wants to invest in real estate. Guy wants to buy a property, but he has no idea what it will rent for. So he's got to balance what that property will bring in against what it's going to cost to hang on to it. The thing that you need to understand about real estate is that it's not get rich quick. It is get rich slow. And it can be painfully slow, because if you're just getting started, you're probably going to hyper leverage. You're going to go into debt as far as the revenues will permit you to. There's nothing for you personally from that property for a while, for a long time, until inflation kind of pushes values up, pushes the rents up, and that rising tide raises all ships, and eventually you own a property free and clear. But there's nothing wrong with get rich slow. I mean, did you ever wonder why most of the richest people you've known throughout your lifetime were older than you?
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a process, and that process of building wealth takes time.
And planning is what it sounds like. I keep hearing kind of like there's a planning aspect of this. So when you are making investments in things like real estate, are you considering the time horizon on when there's milestones on when that investment matures and what it might be worth and how market conditions might affect it?
Well, I don't know so much about market conditions, but I am looking at time as a factor in the wealth process, and I teach my students that. I say, how would you like to be able to live off of rental property? How many would you need, free and clear, producing X amount of rent, in order to be happy with the income you're getting? Okay, let's go out and acquire over the next 5 to 10 years 5 times that many properties. If you can, take a real focus. And then we'll hang on to those properties for 10 years and sell off half or 2/3 of them and use the profits from those to pay the mortgages on the ones you want to keep. You get to cherry pick those and pay them to zero. So that's a 30-year plan reduced into 10 years. But it requires a real focus.
And the variables are, how much, because you mentioned how much rent would you collect, and do you base it on like 80%, occupancy, 100% occupancy? How do you do the projections?
It depends on the market. And yes, you have to count on vacancies. I mean, the market that we're in this city right now is so generous to landlords that there's very little vacancy happening. And when something does go vacant, you're going, yay, I'm going to raise the rents. And that isn't the case all the time. So during the life cycle of a real estate investor, you'll see cycles, and you need to look ahead just a little bit and say, okay, what is this economy like? When does this lease expire? And how do I need to be prepared to have the next tenant go in? There's big panic with novice investors about, and I get this question, what do you do if the property goes vacant? A very common question in a real estate seminar. Well, it's the wrong question. It's an irrelevant question. There is no if. The question you should have asked me is, what do you do when the property goes vacant? If it doesn't go vacant, what's wrong? It's under rented. You're not getting top dollar for that property, so you're doing something wrong if it's not going vacant.
So, and the type of rental properties, is it a residential, commercial? What do you
That's a great question because they're very different. I have focused on residential property, specifically single-family homes. I've owned several apartment buildings during my career, a few commercial properties. But I like houses. They're the most prolific kind of real estate out there. The buyers for single-family homes are the most prolific group of buyers on the planet. There's more people who want single-family homes than any other kind of real estate. So ultimately, if you know what you're doing, they become easier to buy, easier to sell, easier to rent than the other kinds of property.
And how much do you allocate toward the maintenance and upkeep, over the period of time, of the rent?
That changes over time. Many of my beginning students aren't going to have much to allocate. They're just keeping their head above water. I was. My first property was a piece of vacant land, and I acquired it because the divorcing couple who owned it didn't want to make the payments anymore. And so I'm going, oh, I will. And so I just got introduced to the concept of pet alligator.
Pet alligator? What's that concept?
Well, the concept is if a property is bringing in less than you have to pay out, you've got a pet alligator. It's going to eat you. And I had picked the ultimate alligator in that vacant land wasn't bringing in any money.
Right.
But I was single. I was working a job, and I figured I could handle it, which I did, and I eventually traded that lot for a down payment into a rental property. My first one back in the mid-'70s is when I bought it. I still own that property today.
Really? Wow.
Still producing income.
So when you're looking at rentals, I guess with the market fluctuations, as far as values going up or down, doesn't really matter that much, or doesn't really affect rent as far as cash flow?
Well, yeah, it does. The market going up and down affects rent. Actually, availability affects rent. And, we can't really teach a whole real estate seminar in this setting, but I would recommend to anybody that's going to start investing in real estate that they take a few classes, read some books, study online, look at 100 houses and price them out before you ever make an offer on anything. You want to become an expert in value in an area you want to invest in. Then comes time, crunch time is how do we buy it? How do we finance it? Just a quick note on that, and that is you can save up money if you're really disciplined with the income that you have from your job and you don't get too many bills that you have to pay. A lot of people just save up a down payment and eventually put a down payment, buy a house. We actually acquired our first 6 properties by buying a home to live in, and then when we got ready to move, we'd put that home on the market to rent instead of selling it. As soon as we found a renter that would help produce a positive cash flow, then we would move on. So I own the last 5 homes that we lived in as a family when my kids were growing up.
And so you'd move out and just rent them out?
Yeah, and the reason for that is the easiest home to finance is a single owner-occupied single-family home. The most generous terms that are given by banks.
But when you leave, those terms are still in place so that you can now turn them into a rental.
That's right.
And they don't change the deal that you made when you bought the house.
No, because you still own it. You're still responsible for the mortgage.
And do you have a sort of profile of the right kind of person that should be doing this versus the wrong kind of person that should be doing this?
Well, I think anybody could do it. But the right skill set is somebody that's disciplined with their money, recognizes up front that they're going to get calls to go in and fix stuff. And if they have a skill set where they can do some of those repairs themselves, that's going to make things easier on them. I mean, we've learned a lot of that during the course of nearly 40 years of owning rental property. We've learned how to do minor plumbing and minor electrical, and eventually it got big enough that we just, we have people that we call out to now. So I don't do much of that anymore. But we certainly did along the way to keep the cost down.
And what type of leases? Like, let's say I own a home or two homes. I want to rent them. The leases, do I do annual leases? Am I better off getting long-term leases? What's the right perspective on that?
It's not often that somebody wants to come in and sign more than a year's lease. Sometimes you'll get somebody that has their life planned and they want 2 years,
right,
or they want 3 years. And I'm okay with that because we rent our property at the top of the market anyway. And so if somebody's going to be there 3 years, I've given up to a 3-year lease and with no rent increases. But generally it's a 1-year lease, and then we renegotiate the lease after a year. I've had tenants who lived with me for 10 years.
Wow.
And more than one, many. Over the years. And a lot of times my best tenants are people who've gone bankrupt and they can't buy anything for 10 years.
Right.
So they're basically a prisoner of the rental market.
Toward that concept, how do you vet the renters? How do you pick the right people to put in the property?
Again, without trying to do a whole seminar in this setting, I take an application, we verify income, we'll do a background check. And there are services now online where you can actually have it done for you. You just need the tenant's social security number and name, and for a very small fee, you can get that done. A lot easier than when I started.
What are the considerations of buying maybe two-family homes or apartments versus single-family homes?
Well, with single-family home, the expectations are that the family occupying the property will be responsible for all the maintenance. So they mow the lawns, they shovel the snow. If you have a fourplex, you're going to shovel the snow. You're going to mow the lawn,
right,
or you're going to pay somebody else to do it. That's probably the biggest thing. A duplex or a fourplex is a nice investment because you have multiple incomes. You're rarely ever 100% vacant like you are in a single-family home. So, there's some give and take with all of that.
And I have to imagine rent pricing is calibrated toward the value of the single-family home. Or how do you determine? Is it just purely market-driven?
The market tells you how much a property will rent for. What are property owners asking? What are they getting?
Right. So let's say I'm going to make up numbers. It's a $500,000 home. What would be a typical down payment you'd put into a property like that if you're going to rent it?
Well, if you're going to put up a down payment, you're going to need probably 10% minimum. You might need a little bit more. It depends on the type of financing you're putting in place. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah. It's
not a great starting point for somebody just getting started. A lot of the people that came to the seminars I taught didn't own anything. A lot of them didn't have 2 nickels to rub together.
So how were they able to get into houses?
Generally, you're acquiring something that somebody else doesn't want. So if you're out trying to negotiate with a seller who wants to get top dollar to get their property for a bargain, you're wasting your time,
right,
because you're not going to get it. What you're looking for is somebody who has a need, and they have a property they don't want for some reason. The couple who gave me their lot, they basically gave it to me, because there wasn't any equity in it. They had acquired it, put the financing in place, and they were making the payments on this property. They also sold me for taking over 2 mortgages, a duplex. So I got my first 2 properties from one couple because of an event happening in their life that they hadn't planned on.
So that's interesting because basically, did they had a mortgage on the property. They're responsible for the mortgage.
Yep.
They couldn't transfer the mortgage to you.
No.
So
things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
There are methods for financing property that I both utilized and taught that you can't do anymore.
Right.
Because the banks have just really tightened up disclosure rules and who they're going to loan to and what the loan criteria is. But creative financing isn't limited to banks. I wrote a paper that I titled 1001 Creative Ideas for Financing Real Estate. It's really only about 180 ideas in there. And it's usually just a paragraph on each one because what I wanted to do is get people thinking outside of save up a down payment and get a loan. Because I can tell you right now, a lot of people who would like to own real estate will never be able to do that. They'll just never be able to save up enough money for a down payment.
And even in today's environment, though, there's still those creative ways to be able to get into real estate and get the whole process moving.
Absolutely.
So let's say, forget the down payment for a second, but a property is worth somewhat, let's say $500,000, and you somehow found a creative way to acquire the property. You have an obligation somewhere to pay that $500,000.
That's right.
And now if you say, well, what would I need to rent that for? You also are saying that you always want it to be positive cash flow, that whatever's coming in is going to be more than what you have to put out for the property, if you can.
Yeah, on a $500,000 property, if you don't have positive cash flow, you could get yourself into trouble real quick.
Yeah.
Imagine having 2 months of vacancy on what would probably be a $400,000 mortgage, something along those lines. You know, that's thousands of dollars.
It's costly, yeah.
Yeah. So you have to have some pretty good staying power, good personal income, or a nice little slush fund that you have accumulated so that you can cover those downtimes with the vacancies. As far as how much you rent it for, what's going to give you positive cash flow is not a determining factor. It's the market.
Right.
So, and it'll probably be based on bedrooms in this environment where we live here.
So we're in Salt Lake City
We're
area.
in Utah, which is very much family-oriented state. And so it's the number of bedrooms that is going to determine what I can pull in. If that $500,000 home has 6 bedrooms, in this economy, I'm probably going to get $2,500 a month, $2,500 to $3,000. If it's good condition, it's a nice house.
Right.
You know, if that $500,000 house is a 3-story, 1-bedroom condo, then I'm really narrowing the field of people who would be willing to pay $2,500 to $3,000 if there's just 1 bedroom, because we're talking about a person or a couple.
So now I'd have to say, okay, so if I can get $3,000 for this 5 or 6 bedroom home that I have a $500,000 total is what the value was at the time that I acquired it, then I have to make sure that I can find a way to finance that would say that it's less than that much money every month I have to put out, because as you said, there might be vacancies. There's going to be maybe some upkeep. There's taxes. There's
the best environment for entering the market as a new investor is going to be a buyer's market.
Yeah.
That's the best time to get in, because now there are people who have to sell, divorce, transfer, loss of job. There are lots of reasons people are forced into selling, but if the economy doesn't permit a quick sale, that's an opportunity for a creative investor who knows value and knows some ideas on how to put a deal together to take that off their hands. That's a great way to start.
There are many people who are working in jobs. They're making a pretty good living. They've got cash flow in excess of what their demands are on a monthly basis. And maybe they've been doing it for a lot of years, or they're professionals, what have you, and they're thinking to themselves, geez, I don't want to do this for another 20 or 30 years. And real estate seems kind of attractive to me. Is this a good play for them, is to say, I'm going to take some of this excess cash I have and start to build a portfolio of real estate rental properties so that I can not have to do what I'm doing for another 20 years?
Can be. I think, once again, the education becomes important, because you need to be a little introspective and say, okay, am I going to be willing to learn how to write up leases? Am I going to be willing to screen tenants? If I get a call from a guy, it's 101 degrees out there and his AC went out, how responsive am I going to be to that person's needs to make sure that they get that problem solved? And those are some of the issues with renting any type of property. And if you don't mind doing that, there's big payoff in real estate. I mean, the leverage, there's no other investment on the planet that provides the opportunity to leverage. I know there are some financial expert gurus on the radio who don't want you to go into debt, but for most people, without leverage, they don't have a way to get ahead. If they're not a doctor, a lawyer, a 6-figure income earner, leveraging is their only ticket to having any kind of a modest wealth later on in their lives.
I'm also wondering if one of your credentials is psychic. The reason I'm saying that is because I have a rental property that was a primary house that I lived in that was on the East Coast that I now rent out after I moved here. And
there you go.
Less than a week ago, I got the call that it was over 100 degrees.
And
the air conditioning's out, and that is a part of the thing saying, hey, do I want my life interrupted as a landlord when I have renters who are paying a top dollar to live in a nice home? And it's going to happen.
And if you don't mind that, I would highly recommend some rental property. If it's not a total financial solution, it ought to be at least part of a financial solution for a long-term plan for security.
So let's dig into this idea of debt, saying, hey, I like debt for this particular play because I get to utilize it to gain an asset and I have other people going to work to pay it off. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, as long as it's not debt that's infringing on my lifestyle, as long as it's debt that I don't have to pay off, then that's good debt because you've got somebody else paying off a long-term asset. Those mortgages will eventually be paid off. You hang on. Right. Those houses that you bought will eventually double in value. I'm now over 40 years in real estate. So you can imagine there are a number of houses that we've paid off. Everything has really good positive cash flow. You pick your number, you go after it, and then you adopt a plan and some patience to let it take care of itself. Real estate has given me the ticket to ride other financial trains.
Well, let's talk about that. So now you built some real estate assets, and now you've gone into other things entrepreneurially. What if
I've had a passion for food, and not just eating it, but cooking it for others,
right.
And it seems to bring joy, and that brings me joy. So that's been a lifelong pursuit. A foodie, a chef, developing my own recipes. And my daughter's drama club came to me, and they said, hey, we don't want to sell candy bars for our fundraiser at the drama event. We want to sell your garlic butter. And I said, okay. So
you had your own homemade garlic butter that you would have.
I made up a recipe for garlic butter in college. Try to impress a girl. I put on this spread. It was a big Italian meal, and it was a complicated meal.
Yeah.
And the garlic butter recipe came from that meal. Wow. I didn't get the girl, but the recipe stayed with the family, and I raised my kids on it. It's how I got them to eat broccoli and Brussels sprouts and carrots and some of the things that are good for you. And we've sort of adopted that philosophy that, butter is a healthy fat.
Yep.
We need some of it in our diets. And if it's properly seasoned or combined, you combine it with lemon and dill and put it on salmon, and I get my kids eating fish. So that's been the philosophy as they grew up. So I made it for the drama club. They sold it. It went well. I took what was left down to a local boutique grocery store. And 11 years ago, I got my first check for some cases of garlic butter. It was $600. That's my first dollar for my business, and I've got that framed. Photocopy, that is.
You cash the check.
We cash the check.
Yeah, the guy who doesn't do ATM fees is going to cash the check.
If I thought getting into real estate was hard, those first years with trying to manage the cash flow, starting a business was even harder. I went 5 years with no income, and here we are in our 11th year. The company will probably do about $15 million this year.
Wow.
We had 60% growth last year, which makes us number one on the Nielsen report and the SPINS reports of all butter companies in the country for growth.
Wow.
So we've been very blessed by that, and it's been fun now to use the real estate as a vehicle to get the money to start a little business, and now I provide jobs for 150 families. We have a product that people love, and my intended retirement hasn't been much of a retirement. So.
and the brand is Chef Shamy.
Chef Shamy. Chef Shamy Gourmet. You'll find it in Sam's Clubs across the country. Some Costco's carry it, and we've got a lot of grocery stores carrying our brand. We've got the Winco company. They put our garlic butter on their take and bake bread that they sell at their bakeries. And we've got a lot of private label. Walmart carries both our brand and their own brand that we make for them. They're our flavors, and it's growing all the time. So
that's a great story. And this is what's interesting because it all does kind of stem from the real estate market where you're saying, hey, I'm generating income through rentals. I'm also building equity. So it's almost like building a business, saying, hey, my business has got equity in it while it's providing income. Well, the house has got equity in it that grows over time while it's providing income.
So you've got equity growth, you've got mortgage pay down with somebody else paying the debt off, and you've got tax benefits. That was another one of my small money tips is don't rent if you don't have to. If you can figure out how not to rent, don't.
Yeah.
Because you can't deduct a rent payment. You
Right.
can deduct an interest payment on a house.
Right.
And oftentimes you've got renters paying more than they would for rent than they would to make a mortgage payment.
Right.
So that's a small money idea.
Another one of
Watching
the
out
small-
for the little dollars.
So what other small money ideas might you have?
Oh, I actually wrote a book on this. It was 10 ways to get money quick.
Uh-huh.
And it all related to little things. I'll give you one idea. I do not let any checking account statement or credit card statement come to me without scrutinizing every charge. And if you don't do that, you're going to get spanked.
Yeah.
You're going to incur bills that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and again, just recently, my wife was going through a credit card statement, and then suddenly knows a $25 Starbucks, and then another $25 Starbucks, and maybe you see that once, or you're glancing, you say, oh, well, Starbucks, I went, or maybe the kids went, or something, but it's an exact amount, it's the same amount, it's like very small compared to the total amount of the bill, and it had been going on for months, and come to find out, $450 of fraudulent charges that, over a period of months that accumulated, that we were able to go and now recover. But it's exactly what you're saying. Without scrutiny, that small money stuff starts to accumulate.
Another small money idea is use credit cards, not debit cards.
Right.
If your debit card gets stolen and they're able to tap the funds, you lost your money.
Right.
If your credit card gets stolen, they're stealing the bank's money.
Right. Right. Because
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Now, that requires that you have reasonably good credit. Banks are careful about who they issue that to. So making sure you pay your bills, building your credit, have a checking account. Don't use, here's another small money idea. Do not go to a check cashing service.
Oh,
Shame
yeah,
on you.
that's right.
It seems like a small money idea. That's actually a big one.
Right.
That's a big no-no, going to a check cashing place to get your funds.
Right.
Discipline yourself to save up enough to get a checking account so that you can deposit it without a fee for the money you earned.
Is this in large part a matter of just how much time you allocate or how much consciousness you'll put on your finances for the planning side of it? I mean, because it doesn't seem like it's very complicated necessarily, but maybe people just aren't putting the time into it.
It takes a little bit of time, but it's your money. Yeah. It's your security. It's your life. It may be your wife and your kids. And so whatever time it takes to make sure that you're using your resources wisely, take it. Yeah. Take that time. You worked hard for your money. You make sure other people have to work doubly hard to get it away from you. And then don't buy you stuff you don't need.
Yeah, because it is interesting as you're just citing, because and I kind of go over this with my kids. It's a tough, ongoing lesson to get to sink in, but it really takes a lot of effort to be able to generate income. But there's so many things out there that will so easily take it from you, and a lot of it is like you're saying, there's a compulsion to go on and want to buy something from Amazon and have that box show up, and I'm finding, especially kids, that now that they can go out and actually work for themselves and understand what it takes to work an hour and how much you get paid for that, and you get a little bit more excited about not letting it go out the door so easily.
So here's another small money idea.
Yeah.
Credit cards, they get paid to zero monthly. You don't carry a balance on your credit card.
Right.
If somebody's listening to this right now and they have a balance on their credit card, take that card, put it in a bowl, and put it in the freezer.
In the freezer.
That's right. Your credit card needs to be frozen in a block of ice. That's how long I want you to have to think about something you're going to use that card for. Right. And that gives you the chance to think, I'm going to be adding to a balance I don't have paid off.
So this is great. So what you're saying is put it in a bowl with water.
With water.
And have it in there. So if
it's frozen in a block of ice.
If you're willing to defrost that ice cube to use that credit card, it's probably a good purchase.
It's probably something you really, really want. But if you don't pay your credit cards to zero, the interest rates are horrendous. And if you miss one payment or you're late a couple of days, 10 or 11 or 12% interest can go to 28%.
Yeah.
And so people are abused by what they don't know about our financial system, and that's one of those.
Any others that come to mind?
It's a matter of paying attention to where your money's going. Mm-hmm. Every penny, where's it going? When we talked about ATM fees and bank charges. I remember 30 years ago, the savings and loan company where I opened up my property management account went under during the savings and loan debacle.
Wow.
And so they got bought out by a local bank. All of a sudden, a checking account that wasn't costing me anything had fees on it. Mm-hmm. Well, I called them up and I gave them what for. I said, why'd you put these fees on here? They weren't going to tell me the truth. I'm going to tell you why they did it. Mm-hmm. They are allowing me to buy that bank for them. And that's going to go for any service that you're involved in, whether it's cable TV or banking services. If it gets sold to someone else, you're going to see an increase in fees, and that entity is doing that to allow you to buy them that business.
Very interesting, because as you're saying it, it rings so true. Yeah. And I think what they're preying on is complacency.
That's right. Because they know maybe 20% of the people will call up and scream and they'll remove it, which is exactly what happened. Yeah. I called up and screamed and they took it off. That bank sold 10 years later to another bank, and they did exactly the same thing. Wow. They tacked on these fees and they made it harder to have a free checking account, but I have always found out what is the balance I need to have in there so I don't have any fees from you, and that's the balance I maintain.
Wow. And it's the small money complacency that they're all going after, saying, oh, it's a few dollars, it's almost like not worth my time to make the call, but that adds up, and that's the vigilance.
I think everybody's seen their cable bill go from that $30 offer, and all of a sudden they're at $200 a month. And you need to call, here's another one of your small money ideas, call a cable company and say, I'm thinking of changing to Dish because you're too expensive. And you watch how fast that fee will go back down to 30 so that they don't lose your business. Same thing is true of your telephone bill, almost any other monthly bill. I think the utilities would be the ones that you may not be able to pull that with. I've tried it, of course. Yeah, I got no love from the power company one summer when I called up with really, really high air conditioning bills. But I've gotten my cable bill lowered periodically multiple times over the decades. And I've done the same thing with... the other thing you can do is periodically call your credit card company as long as you're keeping that balance at zero and ask them to increase it. One of my favorite techniques for getting into real estate was accumulating up to $100,000 or $200,000 on credit cards, using that for your down payment. Now that's a high risk method because you still owe the money, and you always want to keep that in mind when you're investing. Is you got to pay it back. And if you have where's it coming from?
And you have the cash advance, which typically it's a higher percentage rate on those than normal charges.
It can be.
Yeah. There's the cell phone companies. I think the cell phone providers are also, I think, nickeling and diming. And I'm always seeing new fees on there that were never part of the original
your cell phone
contract.
bill started at $70, and now it's all of a sudden it's $290.
Right.
You just call them up and say, hey, I think I'm moving to Sprint.
Yeah.
They have a better deal. You watch how fast they'll offer you free data and free texting, and they'll get that bill back down. So those are all, we've talked about a lot of stuff in a very short interview. If someone implemented all of those, that's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year.
Wow.
Right there.
Wow. So for people who are considering entrepreneurial ventures going into business, what advice do you have for them?
Don't do it. And I was told that by my brother, who has been a food broker for 30 years. He said, don't do it. You got to have beaucoup money. You got to be really well capitalized to do it. And then I sent him on a trade show where he sampled my food to chefs in Las Vegas. And he came back going, I have never had this kind of a demonstration experience with the many hundreds of products I've represented over the years. Wow. And he threw in with me. So I've made my brother my partner. He operates the sales side of the business, and I'm basically the executive that manages the business.
Wow.
As far as being an entrepreneur, I encourage it. I think capitalism is wonderful. We're in an environment right now where we have certain elements that think that's a dirty word, but they don't understand what it is. Capitalism is basically people providing a product or service and getting money in return for it. What could be more pure than that? Yeah. If you're going to turn it into a business, and you're going to rely on it, then you need a really clear-cut business plan. You need to have surveyed the marketplace to see if they're really going to buy your product or service. It's very easy to fall in love with something that you made and think everybody else is going to love it as much as you do. And it's a real shocker once people have invested their last nickel in trying to start this thing and nobody wants to buy it. In the food business in particular, it's got to be spectacular or they'll only buy it once. And you can't run a business on a product that only sells one time in the food business. You don't get a second chance with that. So survey the market, see if your product's going to sell. Do a business plan to determine how much capital you're going to need, especially if it isn't going to produce enough income for you to live off of it. So you're going to do it as a sideline, or you're going to just throw all in and try to float for a while, and then make sure you're properly capitalized to ride out the storm, so to speak, because it's going to take longer than you think it does.
Now, it sounds like, because you have this focus on small money and just saving little bits of money here, there, and everywhere, that adds up, I guess, eventually to big money.
Yes.
Do you live, for lack of a better term, kind of a modest or a scarce lifestyle, or how?
Well, first of all, we've been very blessed in terms of financial success. We've struggled. I can remember a time where we had this old European station wagon. That's all I had to get my wife and 4 kids around town, and I had to make sure I parked it on a hill so that we could start the car when we came back to it, because it would only start by compression. So, and those were times when we shut off the TV, we shut off the cell phones, back when you could do that and get by without them.
Right.
And so I know how to draw in very quickly and cut to a very modest lifestyle. But no, we've really enjoyed. We've enjoyed travel. I just got back from Egypt and London. I took my wife there for her birthday, and first time I've been to London out of the 80 or 90 times I've been there that wasn't a business trip. So during my early years, I tied in our leisure travel with business. 2 reasons for that. One is the business, either those I was contracted to or my business would pay for the trip. And secondly, the expenses of the trip now become a tax-deductible expense. So that's another one of my small money ideas, and that is, how does what you spend impact your taxes? And here are the questions that I recommend that people ask. The number 1 question is there any way that I can legally deduct all or any portion of this expense? And if the answer to that question is no, the second question is, do I really need it? So I've been fanatical in terms of how I spend my money, and that's enabled us to enjoy some of the finer things in life. I don't live in a huge mansion, but we have 6,000 feet, which is plenty of room for us to kind of wander around in. I have a gourmet kitchen that I put in about 10 years ago when we started this business. Matter of fact, that was one of the reasons I started the business, so I could write off my gourmet kitchen. Yeah, because it was expensive. But on the other side, there are things where I save money that helps me to be able to afford that. When I go out to a restaurant, everybody around me is ordering sodas, or in other circles they're probably ordering hard drinks, and I order water. And the reason, it's healthier, number 1, but number 2, it's a whole lot less expensive. Matter of fact, a lot of the profit margin for many eateries is in the drinks. Okay, well, I want that money in my pocket. If I want to splurge and have a diet soda or something, I might do that from time to time. But how much money have I saved in not spending money on fluids over a lifetime?
And I could see that it actually brings you joy to consider it.
Yes. Well, when I have people who are just impoverished who come to me and they're drinking a beer, they're smoking a cigarette, they're eating candy, and I'm thinking, you know what? If you stop doing this, this, and this, you just put $1,500 a year in your pocket. What could you do with $1,500? So we make unwise decisions with our lifestyles, and the result is it bleeds out into our money, our financial resources, and we get harmed by it. We take 2 steps backwards.
A few times you brought up taxes or saving on taxes by deducting things. Any other tax strategies that
you're going to love this story.
Okay.
So through high school and college, I only ever got an F in one class, and it was Accounting 101. To this day, I'm still a little baffled by double entry accounting. I'm a checkbook guy.
Yeah.
Money goes in, balance goes up. Money comes out, balance goes down. And that simplicity has really served me well. But I wanted to understand the tax laws. When I first got into real estate, I subscribed to a tax newsletter, and I would recommend that. And they usually come out weekly, and they can be long and tedious and boring. But if you will subscribe to and read a weekly tax newsletter for a year, you will know more about taxes than anybody you personally know, except hopefully your accountant knows more. I've had people prepare my taxes who didn't know as much about real estate taxation as I do. And so become an expert on the things that affect your money. And taxes is huge.
And these newsletters, basically, what would you be getting out of them? I mean, just tips, strategies?
They're very current,
Yeah.
and they're usually current with what's going on that time of the year, or if there are new laws that are being considered. You're ahead of the game. You know how a new tax law being considered in Congress is going to affect your life, and the things that you need to do to kind of be preparing so that you can stay ahead of it, so that you're getting the best possible tax write-off spot available. Plus, you usually get some estate planning advice in those newsletters. I got really smart reading and studying tax newsletters. And it only took one seminar where a guy asked me a question that he knew the answer to, but I didn't. And I would not permit that. I did 12,000 seminars during my career. Probably talked to 2 million people.
Wow.
And I prided myself in being the smartest guy in the room. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you can't get ambushed by a know-it-all. But everybody should study taxes because we all pay them.
Yep. I mean, isn't that a place where there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit for people?
Yes.
Because it's like that's money just boom, gone.
Very much so.
And every dollar you can hold on to, boy, that can make a big difference.
Almost every person has a hobby or something they love to do. If you can turn it into a business, all of a sudden the expenses of that business become tax deductible.
Yeah.
I had a family member who used to love to go to Lake Powell. Very expensive hobby, owning a boat.
Yes.
And going to Lake Powell for a week-long trip. Well, he started taking pictures of rock formations and then outlining things that he saw in those formations. And he published a book, which still sells to this day down at the Lake Powell marinas, that he did for profit. And now his Lake Powell trips are tax deductible. I'm currently writing a series of cookbooks. I've finished 5 of. I just sent number 5 to the printer. Number 6, we're doing the photography at the end of the month, and that's permitted me to dine at the best restaurants worldwide and write it off.
Right.
It's an expense. And keep in mind, since we're talking about writing stuff off, the tax law says you can write off that portion of the expense which could reasonably be allocated to the business purpose. And so if we give that caveat, then people who are acting on this advice are going to do their research and make sure that they're not taking more than an auditor would allow.
Right. And when you have hobbies, things you enjoy, as you're citing, you can set up a blog, for it. And I guess you're allowed, I think, to lose money for some period of time before the IRS will consider it a hobby versus a...
Well, they have a list of criteria that they use as a test. Losing money, making money can be a test, but continuously losing money isn't necessarily. I'll give you a good idea. Raising thoroughbred horses. That is a hobby that loses money year after year after year after year after year after year. And you may never get a payback. And if you do, it's at the end when you sell off a horse.
Right.
So the business doesn't have to make money every year to be considered a business. But there's some other tests. You want to set it up like a business with a business name.
Right.
And we want it to have its own checking account. And you want to keep pretty good records on what you're doing in that business. I remember getting audited on my travel expenses for my seminar business because I'd written off $80,000. And I rolled out this big spreadsheet that showed every single expense from airline tips to meals eaten out, and I had it all documented. And he said, "That's fine, gone, done."
Yeah, and that's, again, the details that matter.
That's right.
Terrific.
I have been audited. I've only ever gotten money back as a result of an audit. I like to keep a little in reserve in case that happens. I even got TCMP audited. That's Taxpayer Measurement Compliance Measurement. And that's the audits they do to build their software to generate which returns they should audit.
Wow.
You know, the computer says, oh, this guy's doing something out of the norm. When they do a TCMP, they look at every check, every receipt. You know, they're magnifying glass out and they're looking at your life. And we ended up getting, I think, a $20,000 refund that year that we did that. The auditor was not happy.
Did you thank him?
About that. Yes, my tax accountant did. I had representation at that audit. But if you're doing things right, you don't have to fear an audit. The fear of an audit shouldn't be a reason for taking tax deductions.
Right, right.
You know, fear of not keeping proper records. But my thought is, when in doubt, deduct it. Keep good records on it. If you're challenged on it, state your case. Worst case scenario, they come back and charge you the tax.
Got it.
Maybe a small penalty. That's if they find it. So, anyway,
Terrific.
I hope that's been helpful.
It's been very helpful. Any final words of wisdom for people who are viewing?
Don't lose heart. Stay positive. Plug yourself into materials, be it tapes, books, that will keep you high and positive. I think that kind of energy feeds to success, whether it's entrepreneurial success or success in the investment world. Don't let it get you down.
Great, David. Thank you so very much for your wisdom.
My pleasure.